Welcome back to another episode of the HIT podcast. My name is James Leighton, CEO and founder of Anderson James. This is the podcast where I bring you real life stories from some of the most interesting leaders of our sector. Today, I was joined by two guests on the HIT podcast. I was joined by Helen Ward, Group Organisational Development Director at Torus, and Moreen Pascal, Programme Manager at the Housing Diversity Network. We talk all things diversity and inclusion, and we look at the recruitment process within the housing industry and how we can improve it for the future. If you like the episode, I'd ask that you like and subscribe and share it with your network. So we've got a special episode today for the HIP, and a first on the show today, I think. We've got two guests, not just the one guest. So welcome to Helen and welcome to Moreen.
Hiya.
So just as a nice way to start, as you know, I've already done an introduction at the start of the show, but just if I come to you first, Helen, if you could just give us a little bit of an overview of yourself, your role, and sort of, I suppose how you know Moreen, et cetera, and we'll just sort of set the scene as it will.
Okay, so thanks for having me today, first of all. So I'm Helen Ward, I'm the Group OD Director for the Torus Group. And just in plain English, that's people director, because I do hate people. And essentially, Torus is a big regeneration and housing organisation or group of organisations in the Northwest region. So we are obviously a social landlord, and we've got 40,000 homes, but we've also got a commercial business and a charitable business within the group. So quite diverse, big group trying to improve outcomes for people living in the Northwest. And I've been there since July in 2020, so during the pandemic. But my background, although I'm in an HR role now, I'm not conventionally HR. I've come through a career in transformation and change, really. So it's very much about transforming organisations and about change. And I've worked in local government, I've worked in private sector, and I also spent 3 years at the housing regulator, so I've been around a bit.
Wow.
But I think it's all grounded in the beginning of my career. I worked as a psychologist, and I particularly worked with offenders, so I worked with people going through looking at behaviour change as a response to being involved in the criminal justice system. So the thread, if you like, through my career is about people and change. So that's a bit about me. And Moreen and I have met because we've connected through the Housing Diversity Network, essentially, which is an organisation which I think Moreen will be able to say more about than I can, but it's certainly a valuable organisation that I've connected with. I connected with at the regulator actually originally, but in terms of added value and conversations and debate about driving the diversity and inclusion agenda and in the housing sector, and for me, for my part, what I need to do in Torus and what I can do in Torus, and working with expertise and getting an input to really push the agenda forward from conventional thinking and trying to really do the right things that make change happen.
Amazing.
That's a good enough introduction.
Yeah, it's a really good introduction. And coming to yourself, Maureen, just tell us a little bit about your role and the Housing Diversity Network and how that works for organisations.
So hi there. So what I do at HDN, I decided that I wouldn't introduce myself as I am the Programmes Manager. That's one of the things that I do. It's the role that I play, and it's a role that I really enjoy. Programmes Manager means that I oversee the main programs of HDN in relation to our members. So HDN, Housing Diversity Network, is a network of members. We have now 125 social housing /ALMO members. And actually, Helen, you came on a webinar that I was kind of co-leading on race. And I think the description was from conversation to action, something sexy like that. And I think I said something unscripted because that's how I, when I get into a topic, I started talking from my hobby horse position. And I now recognize that when I do that, it's because I'm trying to synthesize all the experience that I have, all the knowledge that I have, my lived experience as well, my education. In that moment, I'm trying to get across something that I think is incredibly important. Mm-hmm. And what I remember from that webinar was that you actually connected with me as a result of some of the stuff that we were talking about. Unlike most of the others, in that webinar, and I'm always struck by people who make connections with me when I'm mouthing off about something, because I think it must be a kindred spirit somehow, right? So that's cool. So I love my job, what I do at HGen, but it's 4 days a week. And when I'm not there, I also train on the topic of safeguarding adults at risk, which used to be called vulnerable adults. I train on assertiveness and communication. I don't know, people don't call it that anymore, but I still think it's relevant. I was trained by 2 trainers in the 80s around delivering this training, and it's still a topic, I feel, that there's a demand for. So even on our mentoring programs that we oversee, we have our mentees requesting some kind of training to do with helping me communicate with my line manager, deal with difficult scenarios in the workplace. And it's not always from an EDI perspective, it's just from an interpersonal one, and that hasn't gone away from the workplace. But often behind those difficulties, there are issues to do with identity. And I mean that broadly, you know, the protected characteristics. And so what else do I do? So apart from safeguarding training and the assertiveness coaching, formally, informally, is I carry out organisational health checks on behalf of our local community foundation. So each county has a community foundation, and that's where they receive endowments for the good of the county. A lot of people working in your sector, in our sector, in the private sector, may not even be aware of such a thing. But legacies are left, and the community foundation gives grants to charities. And I go around doing like a 2 or 3 hour kind of health check on these charities at the board level, funny enough. So it's interesting that for my day job, I don't do that, but when I'm freelancing, I do that. So, and in the past, you can hear that there's a definite community element to what I do. My really interest and motivation is the impact on the people who are the customers. I care about the workforce, but I care about the workforce in relation to how they do their jobs and how they impact and make decisions that affect real people. And I take that very seriously. You'll get that later on, that I'm quite earnest about that. And I think that has a lot to do with my own upbringing and what I've been exposed to. And I think a lot of what the answers are in relation to leadership is about exposure, about hard conversations. And I'm not giving I am giving the answers from my point of view, but we'll come back to these things. I don't think it's rocket science, a lot of the things that we can do. And I do think a lot of it's to do with education as well, that people are very badly educated when it comes to the facts of our society. So that's also part of my mission. And I think when I was asked aged 8, what do you want to do when you grow up, by one of my aunties and uncles, the first thing I said was be a teacher. And I never became a teacher. I got very close to becoming a teacher, because I got my major is in politics and French. So that's one of my secret powers, is another language. And I think it gives you a different insight into stuff and makes you less parochial. But when I did this 3-day intensive, they were reaching out to people around languages and maths a few years back. And when they gave us the briefing, it said that you have to do all this admin. It instantly put me off, that it wasn't just about being in front of pupils anymore, that a lot of it was about being in the office. And I just thought, no, that's not me, unfortunately. But I loved the interaction with the teenagers around French at the time, but it was a shame that I couldn't do the rest of it. I had to be honest. I said, that's a shame. But I think from then on, I've been involved, a bit like you, Helen, around people. Mm-hmm. And my fascination is in people development, how we learn and how we translate that learning into action. So I don't think I've moved that far from the sort of teaching element. I think it's still there, because I think that's where we make a lot of difference.
Yeah. Amazing. What great overviews. I think they're the best overviews we've ever had. So great start. And so just to I suppose, set the scene and to pare this back a little bit. Diversity and inclusion, massive topic at the moment, and it's something that we're really passionate about as an organisation. I know both of you are, but where are the critical challenges in that at the moment, and where are you seeing the biggest problems in organisations across our housing sector? If I come to you, Helen, where are you seeing the main issues, not just in Torus but in the sector at the moment?
In the sector, I think for me, in the kind of role I'm in, and from where I'm seeing it, is got to be about pace, scale, and momentum of change. I think lots of organisations, and not just in the housing sector, have readdressed their position in relation to diversity and inclusion following obviously Black Lives Matter and the events of 2020. But the challenge is still to go further, faster, and it's the scale, I think. And so I think we're seeing some capacity going into those roles, but it's still, for me, worryingly, one or two people trying to lead a massive agenda, usually kind of with some support, but perhaps not. You know, it's really difficult if you're in one of those in the diversity and inclusion lead role, kind of to try and create change. So I think that's still the challenge, and until you've got, so that's the kind of global, the macro side of it, I think, is how far we go, and not to do convention. I mean, if we've learned nothing else from the last 20 years, it's that what we've done before hasn't created the change that we want to see. So it's about not doing more of the same and thinking that's enough, and not just putting statements out and saying you're doing it without doing it and meaning it. And I think the other thing that I suppose is that what will create change in that is seeing difference at leadership levels, because well, of course it matters to the leaders that we've got now, or some of them anyway. You know, it does. I think it genuinely, people are interested, but I think it's not the same unless you've got the diversity of views and lived experience that will create that real difference and innovation in how to do things differently, whether that's at board level or whether that's exec level or even sort of upper middle management level. We know that there's massive gaps in those tiers.
Yeah, for sure. And for you, Moreen, we'll come back to some of those points then, but for you, Moreen, where are you seeing the biggest challenge in the sector at the moment?
Can I approach this the other way around, that the challenge is for tenants and residents, and they're having an awful time, and I think we're letting them down if we're not putting in front of them people who can think out the box, think unconventionally, who are, I'm going to use the word courageous, because I think we are in a state of kind of like war, siege-like mentality with the pandemic. I think it's demanding that we have a different type of leader, and I think the conventional thinking has to affect everything. That includes the way we train and who we think a manager or a leader is. I think a lot of our thinking in that department is old-fashioned and still restricted by, dare I say it, the way that we think about management, which was, right, I'm going straight for it, is what I understand historically, the office was created by a white male middle-class person. That's who went to the office back in the day. I think it's important to understand that history, not just black history. And I think ever since, that kind of individual, I have nothing against, it's not personal, it's factual. That person has typically dominated that space. So of course you're going to make things, the rules, the regulations, the culture fit what you think is normal. Then you have and I'm going to look at this globally, then you have in the West white females coming to the workplace many decades later, but they got in there. But when they first came in, they came in as secretaries and lowly positions and stuff below their potential. And then eventually, because of potted history, because of the war and having to regenerate, you then open up again, because you can't survive on just those individuals. You have to open up to your former colonies and so on, to meet the demand of the workplace. But when we talk about the workplace in terms of social housing, it's usually the office space up until recently. Okay, and the people, and so I think all of those kind of concepts, we're not keeping up. I think maybe in other sectors perhaps, but we're not keeping up with changing the way we view those kind of roles and what's needed. And it's a vicious circle, because you're not getting the diversity to change the way you look at those roles, unless you do a webinar for HIP and you try and get those conversations out there, or you do one, HDN, we do plenty. Exactly.
And you both, you both said something really useful there in terms of, it is education, isn't it? A lot of this is about how do we educate people more on the history. It's really important, Maureen. I think the history is really important. And I also think that what's important is a lot of people just don't have the education. They're not told about the things that they need to know. And actually, when we talked about the scale, Helen, there, I'd be interested to pick that up. I think for me, a lot of organizations last year brought out some really, really, really crazy strategies around what they were going to do. And, you know, some have really, really accelerated. I feel like we've lost momentum already a little bit in terms of some of those agenda points. And why do you think that is? Why do you think these things get picked up and dropped? Because
I can tell you why I think, and I'm sure Maureen will be able to tell you why she thinks.
Okay.
Because I think what, if I may, Maureen, and how I understood what you said is that we put a pair of glasses on, and we see the world through that pair of glasses, which is a construct that we for some of us we take for granted. That's the construct of exactly what Maureen's described, the way that the businesses and organisations are set up, and I see it from a board point of view and an exec point of view. We see the world, and recruitment, we're going to come on to that. We do things in a certain way because we've always done them in a certain way because they were originally designed in a certain way, and we don't look at them in different eyes. And I think when we start to really unpick that and really start to take those glasses off and see, or you can use the matrix if you want, you take the pill and see the world for what it is, it's hard. And it's a lot of change, and a lot of people will struggle with that change because it might mean different for them. It's letting other people into the space. It's about ripping up the rule book in lots of ways about how you do things. I mean, when we'll talk about recruitment, I mean, conventional recruitment of a CV and an interview and going before that, you know, your experience and your qualifications and your CV and your interview gets you that job in that way.
Yeah,
it's so conventional and actually misses huge amounts of talent out and convention. And I think you're just coming full circle. Your point about the younger generation coming in will want to see things differently. So there's a massive impetus from that generation, the generations coming through that don't want to follow those rule books and see the world through those. So we've got to do it because it will be expected, and the appetite's coming there too. So those of us that are of a certain age and of a certain set of characteristics have to accept, if we want to be part of the change truly, genuinely, authentically, then we've got to accept that what we know has got to be different.
Yeah.
I'd like to respond, if I may, James.
Absolutely, yeah, please.
With some evidence for that, because I totally get. I've got 2 grown-up sons, and the younger one was over from Copenhagen the other week. And he carried on working from his iPad or whatever it was that he was working on. There, he said to me, "Mum, you work too hard." Right. So I'm just backing up what you're saying, Helen. And I said, "What do you mean?" You know. But he's absolutely right that they don't see work. They definitely do work smarter, not long, not complicated. They keep simplifying, and he's really made me think. And I think. So that's one thing. He's based in Copenhagen now, but when he comes over here, sees us, make sure we're all right, he's still working. It's not a problem. Very fluid what he's doing. And I also want to address the fact that when we talk about diversity, this is not about capability or capacity. I was born here. As old as I am, I'm a grandma now. There's other generations here. So this is not about. So I've got qualifications. So is my children. There's also something about equality here, and it's not equal. It's not equal. And I think what you get then is, one, you lose out. Totally get that. I think you do. And that's why I get irate, because I can see it's not just a matter of this is not fair. We're also missing out when we've got these huge problems, but we're not including a big enough group of people. We're not getting a big enough group of people around the table to help solve the problem. And so the problem keeps getting worse in my book, because we haven't got the right people around the table, especially now. And it's urgent. Homelessness, illness, COVID-19, and all the rest of it, social injustice. It's climate change. All of those things are no longer just about a few group of people. These things are global issues, but we're not involving global people in the discussion, and by that I mean all the protected characteristics. Yeah. So yeah.
no, it's such good points. And I think as we look at that attraction and recruitment piece, when we've done surveys before, the attraction of younger people, and we might as well talk about it, or graduates, trainees, people coming into the sector, new generation of talent, they're not being inspired by the advertisements we're putting out there. They're not feeling inspired by the way that our websites look, the way that we present ourselves. There's a lot of work to be done in just the fundamentals of the industry. But how can we make it more appealing? How can we make it more attractive? What can we do more to make the sector stand out to younger talent, people that want to come and look at new roles? Because some industries are really, really, really accelerated beyond us at this stage. You know, if I look at your Facebooks, your tech businesses, you know, they're setting up these businesses on the right principles in some cases now. And actually, it means that they're easily recruiting diverse talent because it's just the way they do things. How do we retrofit those processes into already established businesses?
It's a challenge because we've got quite a lot of habit and convention to unpick. And just taking Maureen's point on the qualifications and etc. I mean, I 100% agree that there are certain groups of people where they're overqualified and not getting the opportunities. There are others that won't follow normal qualifications. So I'm thinking disability, and in particular, I've got an autistic son, and I see in the future how the conventional way of doing the career isn't going to necessarily play out for him in terms of going to university or and applying and going through a normal process to get what we accept as a normal process to get a job. However, he's got massive talent, and so it's absolutely tapping into that diversity in different ways and changing the way we do things. So how do we attract them? It's got to be about doing things differently. The whole experience of applying for a role and going for a role in the kind of way that you are assessed for a role. Not assuming that people have followed a conventional path. That's one of the things we can look at and unpick. And I'm really excited about, well, I've got a lot to learn about it still, but really excited about what does that mean? What does that look like? What is that experience like? And being able to present that as an experience to somebody, I think that's where some of the super tech companies are getting it right, is that whole experience from the moment you start the dialogue is exciting and a bit different. Yeah,
that's true.
James, sorry to interrupt, but can I come in there before I forget? Because I want to shout out to the CEO of HDN, where I work, Mushtaq Khan, who said recently on a webinar with a group of mentees that I'm working with, he said everything before the pandemic and Black Lives Matter, you should throw out. I think if you're serious about doing things differently, wake up and respond to two of the biggest global events that's happened. Why are you still hanging on to stuff that was pre that?
Mm-hmm.
The world has changed in ways that I think a lot of people don't realize.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we've gone back to normal, a lot of people, because it doesn't feel urgent anymore. We're not seeing it on the TV anymore, so it must have got better. But actually, so many things have changed forever that unless you're picking up those and, you know, educating yourself as to how things have changed permanently, you're missing the point. So that's one thing that I would totally agree with what he said. Tear it up, start again.
Agree.
That's about being brave. That's about doing unconventional things. So I've often thought I may not be the highest employed person in my organisation, but I know that I've got strengths around identifying talent. So my background's not HR, but because I'm interested in people, I notice people, a bit like Helen. Even if you weren't in that field, I notice people. So if your son had come into an organisation, I would notice him, I would see him. And I think you need people in the recruitment process who are not part of the recruitment process, who can almost comment on what's going on. And to give an example, in my prep for this, you may have heard about the Social Housing Tenants Climate Jury that the Northern Housing Consortium commissioned with 5 of your providers up in the Northwest. I was really impressed by that, because that doesn't say this is EDI, but for me, this is part of EDI. It's a way of looking at the world which shakes up the order in which we do things. They didn't start with, you know, the board members, blah, blah, da, da. They started with the tenants and they're building up. And these tenants have now made these recommendations that perhaps board members are looking at and running with. But I think that's part of the way of shaking up the way you approach things, involve different people. Forget about their titles. I think we get hung up on job titles. We equate, you know, seniority with intelligence, which really bugs me. As somebody who's never been a CEO or an AD of anything, and I'm not bothered by that, I can assure you I've got a lot to contribute. And I say that on behalf of other people like me, that we're not CEOs, and when, you know, we might be customers, but that doesn't mean we're stupid. You know, we're not daft. We're interested. It doesn't mean we're not interested. And so I think it takes brave leaders to change the way they think and to reach out to unconventional people to provoke a reaction, a bit like a volcano.
Yeah,
Just to add to that, if I may, James, sorry, you probably
Yeah,
got
no.
a word in edgeways, you know that, don't you?
That's good. Love it. This is the easiest episode I've ever done.
But just to add to that, that's where things like the reverse mentoring, giving access and voices, you know, to people who've got these really, well, all ages, but, you know, we're talking about the next generation of people coming through, giving access to people in positions of power, to give them the chance to, I mean, I think wood mentoring is so powerful because it, you know, that with all due respect to colleagues up and down the country in senior roles, you spend more time inside rooms talking and less time out doing than ever in those kind of roles, and to lose that connection, and you are who you are the age you are, the person you are, you've got, you can't change that. The only way is to get informed and to get those voices heard. And I think whether that's with boards or whether that's with exec teams or even just management teams, whether that's tenants, as Maureen said, or just young people who have a view and something to offer, to be able to share reality.
I agree.
Really
That's such an important point as well, because I've seen the reverse mentoring working across organisations, not just within your own organisation. And I think the one thing that we've got on our side as a housing, if we just take housing associations and RSLs, everyone wants to collaborate these days, you know, and we are actually very good at collaborating. So why all go on our own direction? Why don't we all join together and solve the problem as a global community rather than just individual businesses going off and doing their own thing? And I think that's really improved. I can say that 12 months, I've seen more collaboration than ever before. And it's organisations like Housing Diversity Network and other businesses that are really bringing people together in a nice way. And I'm enjoying seeing that. If we look at the recruitment process, there's something I really want to get your view on, which is we do a lot of recruitment across the sector, leadership, right down to, you know, all levels of the housing market. And some organisations have started to look at blind CVs, putting your adverts through tools that will make them more diverse, these sorts of things. Now, for me, the blind CV thing is something that I just don't believe in, because I think that there's an educational point before the blind CV to say the bias just gets moved to further in the process for me, i.e. yes, the manager doesn't know that the CV comes from a diverse background, but actually when you get through the process, that's going to come at some point. So for me, it's education. What's your view on that? Because we said about traditionally applying for a job, putting a CV forward, all them things. What could we change in that process to make it more diverse, more appealing for people to apply for roles in the sector?
Yeah, right. So now you've got me. Okay, so I'll try and I do sigh. Okay, because we've got enough information and data out there. I was just looking on the government website about the breakdown of employment, ethnicity, gender, all the, and you know, just this, it's been updated just this year. So part of the education, which I think is part of the awareness, is be bold and be honest. Let's start with the facts that if you're, and I'm going to focus on ethnicity, if you're a BME graduate, within 3 years, you've already fallen behind your white British counterpart in terms of salary. Okay, so you both get to the point of being graduates, and I guess this is it's a personal thing for me because I'm a graduate. I was probably one of the earlier ones in this country. We're still seeing the same thing happen. That we don't need blind CVs or whatever you were calling it, James. Is that through the whatever process you were talking about, is let's get real. Let's look at the data and say, when it comes to this group, we have, you know, like we used to do positive action, right? Not positive discrimination, but positive action, and say, here we are well represented by white graduates, white British graduates in this area. So let's focus on why, and let's examine whether or not we actually need a graduate for this post. And if we say yes, we do, there's plenty of them out there. So let's look at so it comes back to data, something that HDN has been going on about recently. Did a piece of work with the NHS on precisely, you know, what the workforce looks like in social housing. There's your facts. We're well represented with white British undergraduates. Okay, so let's look at the other areas. Why are we underrepresented, especially for our region, especially for our area? So something that's really kind of upset me this morning is, how to put it, looking at the government website, you're more likely to be employed as a Black graduate. I'll just focus on Black, and that's Caribbean and African, in the Southwest than you are in London. Now that might surprise a few people.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, there's stuff going on there. God knows what that says, but I was just looking at it on face value. Oh, that's surprising. In fact, I wrote it down. Maybe it was. This is not even as a graduate. This is just employment. Okay. And I thought that's interesting because people make assumptions that the east of England, where I'm based, I live in Hertfordshire. As a Black person, I'm more likely to be employed in the east of England than I would be in Northwest region. So what I'm so and that's just employment. So when you look at then, you know, qualifications and academic qualifications, it doesn't necessarily get better. There's something, in other words, when it comes to recruitment, it's not just the internal process, which is terribly important. No, I'm going to stay with you. There's an interaction with what's going on externally as well. And what I'm trying to say is, with recruitment, don't just look at be brave, look at the facts around your region, get your data, and then work to it and say, look, people, I know some of you will be uncomfortable, but we're going to focus on reaching out to our Black undergraduates or our white and Caribbean undergraduates in the Northwest, because we know they are underrepresented in this, right? Just say it, and just, and then instead of having this general thing that you just cast out and hope for the best, go to the problem, go to the underrepresentation. And where there's underrepresentation, there is overrepresentation. And what I noticed, Helen, is that we never talk about overrepresentation. We talk about, we never tackle that and get people to explain. It's always about, the deficit model, and it's the people who are on the receiving end who have to explain it, which is also annoying. So what I'm trying to say is, no, I am saying it is going back to courage. Deal with it. If you want facts, deal with the facts. The facts are there. They're on the government website. It's not me saying this. Make them work for you. And then if there are objections, I think often people are afraid of objections, a negative response to being courageous and unconventional and, being challenged. And I understand that on a human level, but then explain it to people and say, this is why we're doing it. Because these are the facts. We know our own data, if you do know your own data, but the piece of work that we did with the NHF and HDN suggests that actually people don't.
Well, what I was going to say is massive holes is wherever I go, wherever I've been, is just people don't want to disclose for lots of obvious reasons. And I think one of the things, I mean, and which links, so I completely agree with what Maureen's saying. In a way, just looking at the process is missing the point a little bit. It's got to be about conscious participation and active kind of thinking in the process about what it is you're trying to achieve at the end of it, rather than just, do I look at the name on the CV? Or not, because I'm just going to carry it because I'm just doing the normal sifting process. But it lends itself directly then to what the experience is for the individuals when they come on board, so you can go through that process. I was thinking about the statistics that Maureen quoted, and the reality is that if we were to improve our intake of people from underrepresented groups, their experiences at the moment is unlikely to be positive, and their experience will continue in the workplace in terms of their likelihood of dealing with either disciplinary cases or people tend to, particularly from Black groups, but the range of underrepresented groups tend to have poor experiences in the workplace. So we need to do positive action to improve our diversity, but then we have to make the inclusion bit work, where they then actually have a positive experience when they're actually part of the workforce, and that is continued. And I think that's another huge challenge. Yeah.
And I love something you said, Maureen, there about courage, because I'd ask your view on this. I sometimes worry when I go to write a LinkedIn post or to say something that I think is my view, that there's a bit of a cancel culture out there in terms of people looking for you to say the wrong thing. And I must be honest, there's been times where I've put something out there, I might have been wrong or ill-informed or not educated right in the way that I've said it. But actually, I think that stops people from having an opinion because they just don't want to say the wrong thing as well. How can we help and encourage leaders of our sector to, and not even leaders, anyone in our sector to have an opinion? And if they get it wrong, we support them in their education. But actually, at the minute, I think people actually don't want to say anything for saying the wrong thing. How can we help that messaging?
Well, can I give some credit to Helen in this regard?
Yeah.
Because really simple things can have huge impact. So I wouldn't know you, James. You hadn't heard of me before today, had you?
Had.
You know what I'm saying?
But yeah.
But I think sometimes what we can do is right in front of our noses. So because Helen reached out and also suggested me is why I'm here. And I think I am an example of what we've done is an example of what could be happening. So if you don't know, and also giving you credit, Jet, you know, when you write things and you're a bit concerned about, if that's the case, why not reach out to somebody and say, well, why don't we collaborate on a piece together?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Or tag in, look, or say to people, I know what I'm about to say might be a little bit provocative or whatever, right? Just cover yourself in that way. However, and then go ahead and say it.
Yeah.
Tag people in, collaborate with people, going back to the collaboration, who perhaps don't get a chance. Now you can hear I've got enough to say, and I've got more to say, but I'm conscious that we're time limited, and it's not just about me, and I'm trying to be part of the conversation. But I actually seriously, this is an example of how you can move the goalposts. On Monday, I went to the launch of the Disability Resilience Network. The reason why I was able to attend that was because the man, Philip Connolly, who was in charge of that, reached out to me on LinkedIn. Use your LinkedIn contacts. He likes what I say. I liked what he was saying. And when he was doing this, he invited me, not because I'm a disability expert. It's to do with the kindred spirit about how you think, about how you look at the world,
of course.
How you want to learn. You're aware of where you're not so good and you're willing to expose yourself. And I think we are brave, because I'm not an expert and on this issue. I just want to make that plain. But I'm becoming more of an expert because that's the whole point. Because people like me, and I don't just mean in terms of ethnicity, I mean anybody who's part of a minority, round, diverse, neurodiversity, age, whatever it is, what we have got in common is not being part of the mainstream. That's how I look at it, in the way that, and yet we know a lot about the mainstream because the mainstream is dominant. So I know a lot, ironically, about what it means to be white.
Yeah.
You get my,
absolutely.
I also, and this is why I know a lot about what it means to be a white woman, because I'm a woman. So we've got that in common. But I also have I'll say, privilege of also not being a white woman. So I can look at things like in a mosaic kind of way.
Yep.
And I think there's lots of people out there, because of their intersectionality, who can bring that to the party. And I think I should stop being shy about that fact. We've got something to contribute, because going back to the glasses, we have more than one way of looking at the world. And I think because we've got more than one way of looking at the world, we naturally reach out to other oddballs. I put down here weirdos, because I love a weirdo. I love weirdos. As long as they're not, creepy weirdos. I like people who are non-conformists. That's I'm drawn to them because I'm also part of the outsider community who looks at the world in a slightly different way. And I appreciate the difference that they're bringing, because I appreciate my own difference. So maybe it's easier for somebody who's not part of the mainstream to make these connections, and probably why Helen and I, we've connected in that way, because you're also part, Helen, I put it to you, because of your son's experience, you have another way, a new lens to look at the world, which enriches, right?
And my father was deaf, lifelong deaf, born deaf, and his from a deaf family. So I've experienced that growing up. Again, it's a small, it's a particular window, but I've seen the experience. He never been able to use a phone all his life. So for him, you know, the experience, seeing his view of the world and being able to see it, think that, and that, weirdly, things like technology making masses of difference to that particular community because they have access to communicate to each other. Like I can text him now, I've never been able to speak to him on the phone. Yeah, I would agree with you. We have some of us have little windows, but I think, and we have to draw on them. And if we can't draw on them ourselves, we have to reach out and talk to others who can bring that to bear. I think.
And I think 2 or 3 years ago, we looked at it from a business perspective, and we're change agents, all of us, aren't we? We can all make change here. Like, and the recruitment world, albeit it's got a bad reputation at times, has got a big part to play in this, in my opinion. And we looked at all of our processes, and I realised that some of our processes were massively biased, and we had to change them, and still are. You know, like we're still learning as an organisation, and we're going to be learning for 10, 15 years beyond this point. However, one thing that we've all talked about, and I think we share, is leadership is important in this, and leadership in our individual businesses and the sector as a whole is very important. But we've been out and done many campaigns recently where we want diverse candidates. This is the situation, but they've got to have asset management experience and they've got to have this skill set and this qualification. Well, from a recruitment perspective, that's all good and well. You're telling me that that's what you want and you want diverse shortlists, but I can't deliver all of those things in one place. How do we change that in the future?
I was going to enter Maureen. I was going to ask you, because we talked about some of this at the recent HDN conference. Because I think there is something of a myth as well that talent doesn't exist. Just to challenge that, and we had that conversation. I'll pass over to you, Maureen, if I may.
Please do, Helen. Thank you very much. Can we just go back to basics? You know, these people with the asset management experience, there must have been a point where they didn't have it.
Agree.
You're not born with asset management experience. So why is it we always raise the bar higher? Once we've gone in, we start closing the door. Nearly yeah. You just have to edit that bit out. That's what happens, isn't it? I've arrived, right? I've got to where I need to be, and then now I need to recruit more people. Instead of saying, well, you know, look at yourself. There was a point when I wasn't an asset manager. I was somebody who became an asset manager. Why not? Okay, here we go again. Positive action. Recruit for potential. Understand that it's not because people can't become asset managers. I totally take your point, James. It's because they haven't been exposed to those kind of careers.
Yeah.
You know, the reason why I said I wanted to be a teacher was because I didn't know many other occupations when I was 8. Similarly, and I wasn't in that group of people where, you know, someone's a doctor and this, that, and the other. So you haven't got those examples in front of you. So if you know that, why make it harder for people to come in? If you want to make that difference, recruit for potential, plan, do more long-term planning and say, this is where we want to be in 5 years' time. And say by then we would have trained up ourselves if we have to. Otherwise, you'll miss out on talent. So let's use the example of football. So I'm into football. It's ridiculous, right? So here I go. People have heard me say this before, but okay. During the 80s, people, you know, coaches, managers used to say that Caribbean people couldn't play football. I mean, I have to laugh.
Incredulous, isn't it, really?
But yeah, you know, when you don't want things to change, you can always come up with some excuse as to why it can't. You make it their problem. Where are we 40 years later? Is half of the national team, I would say, has an African or Caribbean descent, as well as an English one. A lot of them are mixed, whatever. Great. Now, if football can do that, right, and it's not the most progressive industry, I would argue, because money counts, because the bottom line counts, you have to recruit for, well, we want the most talented. If that means sometimes we are overrepresented, as long as you've made the opportunity open, truly open, if you end up with an overrepresentation, I would suggest that the football team is overrepresented now, ironically, by people of black descent. Nobody worries about that. As long as they're playing for us or making money, who cares? That's a good overrepresentation. But the point I'm making is, if somebody has talent and there's money involved, it's funny, isn't it? You'll find a way to make it, you know, the market will make it happen. And using my own lived experience, I've got 2 young men as children, and I think they're an example of what happens when you're left out, you know, and how it can be different. So one of them, he got his job at Goldman Sachs on graduating, and that could be a reflection on Goldman Sachs that they're looking for talent. They didn't say, "Oh, we can't find any, people of colour." They don't go about it that way. You do your interview, and then hope presumably they take the best. And my son said in that I was the only state school candidate. So there's another intersection about class. I was the only one. My kids went to the local comprehensive. There he is in that competitive situation, and he could compete.
Yeah.
Because maybe Goldman Sachs recruitment process takes away the bias and focuses on the individual. Okay, doesn't make it hard for them. And he got there, competing with mainly white, private school educated boys, young men, not even women, not even girls. It was a very male. So that's a shout out to working class, people of colour, state education, whatever you want to call it. They can compete if you make the competition a bit like football fair. Yeah. Football is a very simple industry. You can either kick the ball and score a goal, or you can't. So, you're not going to say you can't kick a ball, but you can say you can kick a ball. So you get it, you say the door's open for you. Whereas in our industry, it's a bit more sophisticated. You can make it harder for people because it's not that black, if I use the term black and white. You can put invisible barriers in the way of people. And we know it's not an exact science. So even if somebody on paper should get the job, if they subconscious bias, if that person we feel doesn't fit our culture, you'll find a way of making sure they don't come in. Mm-hmm. And that's what, I'm going to be hard hitting. Mm-hmm. So on paper, they're good enough to get the interview, but there's something about them a bit provocative, a bit mouthy, or a bit whatever it is. We'll find a way of saying to them, "Oh, we had somebody else lined up. Oh, you didn't quite meet all the." I've heard that, but and it gets correct. So we make it difficult for people because we're not educated as to how psychologically, and come back to Helen's expertise, how humans interact, how we can cover up and make things appear to be what they're not, how we can, it's all quite devious sometimes, instead of being upfront and honest. Okay? Yeah. We don't do that. We go for complicated because then we can cover up what we're not doing. Yeah, and I'm being very provocative because I think that's what happens. Mm-hmm. Think about football.
I was just going to comment, if I may, as well, Maureen. There was something else we talked about, which is as well. So that's where it's absolutely right, where there are people that haven't had the opportunity to compete because of the equality, equity argument. But also, the reality is as well that there are definitely pockets. Oh, pockets is the wrong word. Definitely, there is definitely talent available. But we don't necessarily look for it in the right place, or we don't attract it, and we don't appeal to it. And in fact, what we were talking about at the conference was also that if anything, there are groups that are overqualified, that they have to work harder and have all the qualifications, yet we still ignore that.
Yeah, so true. And I think as well, you mentioned a good point there, but are we limiting people's beliefs through the school, college, university, all those systems as well, in terms of this is what you can do, this is what you can't do? Because I speak to a lot of graduates, and a lot of the time it's like, I'm probably not going to be good enough to go and do that. What do you mean you're not going to be good enough? Who's telling you this? Like, you can do whatever you want and you can pursue whatever career you want. As we transition just into retention, and I feel like there's going to be a part 2 and part 3 of this podcast, to be honest, but as we transition into just some of the retention, we've run some data internally at housing associations. I'm not going to name who they are, but there's a clear link between when people come into an organisation that come from one of our underrepresented characteristics, that progression's slower. I can't put it any more bluntly than that. So why? What's going on there?
Well, so we're back to, aren't we? Structural sexism, racism, homophobia. Mm-hmm. Look, because I think Helen's just kind of described it without actually putting a label on it. So once you go in, you get into the system, lucky. So you've got in, and then if you're not aware, so how institutions work and how they reinforce things and how culture is reinforced. And if you have stereotypes about what a manager looks like. So if you've done the right thing, you've got people in who are diverse in their looks and talent and thinking, they may still, if you're not aware, experience obstacle. Mm-hmm. prejudice. In fact, I know it because at HTN, I'm leading a BME action learning set, and we've got 12 members in the group representing 8 organisations, and that's how it was set up, especially in the aftermath of the Floyd killing. And everybody's guards were up and everything else. And as a Black person myself, I became aware that there will be some people who would have been triggered by what has happened, like I was. And it kind of, you remember everything that's ever happened to you in the workplace and in society. Awful. It just comes up. It's trauma. And so with workplaces, so with that example, I'm trying to describe, I hear in that group, I also hear with our mentees who are on the main programs, an individual's experience at work can be highly affected by the line manager.
Yeah.
Okay. And nobody can witness that. But what you're hearing is some of the things I hear, I think you'd be really surprised, maybe even shocked in our social housing sector, what goes on at a line management level. Stuff that people have to deal with from tenants and then get no support. So racist, homophobic, sexist comments, and that's with tenants. Now, a lot of our staff, because they're so professional, they kind of accept, they deal with that. But what they're not expecting is not to be backed up by the line manager. Can you imagine, right? You've already got a job to do, but in addition to that job, you have to manage those interactions on top of the job. And then you're not even being paid that much because you're not at the higher levels. And then you don't get the support and backup, not in all cases, but in a lot of cases, from your own line manager. And then then you wonder why people don't progress, because if I can speak on their behalf, you then get stuck in having to sort that out. That's time, that's energy that somebody who doesn't have to deal with that doesn't put, just focus on my career. Thank you very much. But other people are having to put energy into, I have to go back into work tomorrow. How am I going to handle that? They're not thinking about their career. They're thinking about something else. That's just a small, thing to the world of. And then the institutional organisation not being aware, that not challenging their managers, not making managers accountable for the implementation of what the statement is. I think a lot of organisations and employees are often very ignorant about what really goes on behind closed doors. And then when you've got people now working from home, some of this stuff has become even more invisible. And yet I think if you've got the right kind of leaders and managers, they ought to be aware of how change affects our EDI goals and our goals in general and what we're doing about it. And I know some organisations are doing stuff around it, but a lot aren't, because it's micro, it's at the personal level, but it often affects very similar people. So you hear these personal stories, but you can bet your bottom dollar this is happening. This is true for other groups as well.
I'm sure. And Helen, what have Torus done around this from an educational point of view around management and line management? And
I think it's really interesting, because I think for me the key is the human-focused, human-based management and leadership, which I think is not, and we're looking at it in Torus, and I've worked in quite a lot of organisations, and it's not unique to Torus. I think it's fairly common across most kind of conventional kind of organisations, institutions, and that is about trying to help managers to be human in their management, rather than task and skill focused in their management, because we recruit and promote based on heavily on that side of things, without necessarily thinking about their capability as people to react to deal with people in those situations. So we're doing a lot of work with managers to invest in managers. So to be fair, to try and invest in them, to give them the development they may have never had the opportunity to do, because some people are just naturally better with people than others. So we have to accept that. And exactly the kind of coming full circle to the point that Moreen made about, you have to see people and you have to connect with people on a human level, even if it's in your job as a manager and you feel like I'm an accountant and I'm an accounting manager and I look at spreadsheets and numbers. Well, no, that is not your single skill set. You need to speak to, you need to be able to work with and understand humans. And so investing in that time and trying to take them kind of through the pathway of what that looks like and how you have to put yourself out there, and a bit about vulnerability, it's a bit about the bravery, having conversations with people at work that conventionally we don't have, but it's about connecting on the human level, and understanding and hearing and listening. And I think that's a big part of what I think, from my point of view, what we can do from an HR point of view is try and create the space to make that happen. But we've got to model it then, haven't you? Everyone's got to do it. It's got to be modelled from the top down, bottom up.
Well,
sorry, James, just to finish very quickly on that.
Yeah, no, right.
That comes full circle to tenancy. Absolutely, completely supporting the point that Moreen made, which is ultimately we'll then also have the human connection with the people who we're here for in the first place.
Yeah. And a lot of managers I speak to give people credit in the sector, a lot of the time they don't feel like they're being invested in to get the learnings and education they need to manage properly. So, to give them credit, not always are people avoiding their biases and stuff. They actually want that education and learning. What resources can they use if they do want to go and learn and their organisation isn't supporting their development? What is there out there that they could go and look at, observe, read? Is there anything that you would suggest for someone that's listening that wants to deal with what they're doing from a management perspective and wants to deal with any biases, subconscious, unconscious? What would you suggest?
Be vulnerable.
Yeah.
So, I was saying that I know more about white people than white people know about me because of the dominance, in numbers. Put yourself in situations which perhaps you wouldn't normally go to. Come to HDN webinars, be a guest on one of our webinars, interact with an organisation like ours, like Helen does, and yours, James. But Helen's reach, interact with people who you don't normally meet. So join things which will educate you. You don't always have to read. You just need to be in the company of people. So this thing that I attended on Monday virtually, that took place in London, I learned a lot from people about disabled people and what their mission was and what their concerns were, because I attended that. And I asked questions. That's another tip. Ask questions. Don't be people respect that. People are not, they want you to ask questions because they recognize that you know that you don't know. You're not setting yourself up as somebody, you're being vulnerable because you're admitting that you don't know something. So I'd say ask questions. And that is about a personal trait, is you're going to ask questions if you're genuinely interested.
Of course.
If you're not genuinely interested, maybe you should get out of the way. To go and do a job that's not about people and humans. Go and do a job, and I'm not against it. There's some people not really interested in people. Fine. Don't occupy spaces and jobs where really it's about people. And I think social housing, that's what it's really about. So yes, we know asset management, blah blah, and they're important things. But ultimately, you're managing your assets because people are going to make use of those assets. For me, it's as simple as that. You're not just doing it because it's an art form or a science, right? Let's keep joining the dots. And I'm willing to learn about asset management because I want to be a non-exec board member in a not too distant future. And so I've had to put myself on a course to learn about the concerns of boards, right? And I admit that's my knowledge. And I'm good at learning. I can do that. Academically, I'm quite good at learning. So I'm reversing it and I'm putting myself in that position. But what I now recognize is that a lot of people like myself, Helen, we're very strong in those other areas, which come naturally to us. And I think there's a connection there about recruiting and selecting to strengths. That's another buzzword for you, not just skills. It's about strengths. At HDN, another shout out for them, we are focused on strengths now, because that helps everybody. Everybody has strengths. And that stops you from just looking at things from top down, is where are our strengths in our organisation and how can we make the most of those strengths in the interest of our organisation. And I think that would also help you take an unconventional look at the way you do things. So did you get all that, James? It's
absolutely.
Put yourself in the company of people who are not like you and suck it up. I do that all the time. I'm often in the room with only white people in it. I'm always in that, so I get very comfortable and I find it easy. I'm always in a situation where I'm the minority and I've sucked it up. It's not always been easy, but I'm used to it. But I've exercised that muscle. But I go to, as I said on Monday, the disability shout out for them because they'd like more members. The Disability Resilience Network, look them up on LinkedIn. I was very much not out of my comfort zone, but yeah, I was, because this is not, but I learned loads and I asked questions. So that was the other thing, ask questions, be vulnerable, and get out of the way if you're not really interested in humankind. If that's whatever.
Love it.
No, seriously.
That's true. I totally agree.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
Some people not really. They're like, they're not really interested in humans.
Yeah. And look, I think the one thing that I'm seeing, Moreen, from you is that this is the sort of narrative we need to hear in this way. Like absolutely direct, straight to the point. This is what needs to happen, because actually there's too much of this submissive language used in this narrative sometimes, and actually it just means that nothing ever ends up happening with it.
Why Moreen and I connected in the first place, because she's
exactly.
direct passion from the heart and truth, and
I can see that. I can really see that. And as we just wrap up, in terms of just one thing that you would do in housing tomorrow to make the biggest impact in diversity and inclusion. So I'll start with Helen. What would be the one thing you'd go, right, that's it, tomorrow we're doing this, that's it, rip the rule book up, you can do anything you want? What would it be?
I would overhaul board appointments and boards so that they have to have enforced diversity on, that we have to have difference on there. We don't wait for the boards to get there themselves, but they don't really, because the people on the boards don't want to evacuate the chairs so that others can join in. I would rip it up and get difference on every board, and I think that would soon make a difference through the organisation, because the boards would hold the rest of the organisations to account.
Great. That's really totally agree. So, and Moreen?
You know what? I think Helen's stolen my. Board. Sorry. I think stolen my. That's where I would go, straight to the board. Not to have a go at them, but to expose them. They're often talking and having discussions about people they know nothing about, have very little experience of. I would invite tenants and residents and people who are not even tenants, who live in the community, to be part of the board meeting process, even if they couldn't vote. But I think that would change the behaviour on boards if they had diversity of people listening to what they're saying, a bit like how local government used to operate. Back in the day, because my first job was in local government housing, you could go and sit, the council chamber as the resident, council taxpayer now, sit there and observe their meetings. I think it's a very good, sobering experience that, we should bring back or introduce into our sector, and just get what's the juxtaposition of very different groups back up together. So invite tenants to listen in on a board meeting, and let's see what would happen. Amazing.
So, just as we wrap up, it's been amazing. I'm definitely going to do another one, because I think I had all these prep notes and 3-4 pages of things I wanted to talk about. We got through about half of it. So you were right at the beginning of the show that we weren't going to get through it all. But I want to do something else. If people want to reach out to either of you, and I suppose an opportunity, Moreen, for you to just promote the Housing Diversity Network, what's the process? Do I go on LinkedIn? Do I email you? What's the best way of getting in contact with HDN?
Yeah, why not email me at Housing Diversity Network? So Moreen, not spelt that, the Scottish Irish way, like Doreen, MOREEN at housingdiversitynetwork.co.uk. Obviously, there's a Housing Diversity website. So, and we've got the page on LinkedIn.
And I'll put that in all the show notes as well. I'll make sure that's all in there.
And they just say, attention, Moreen, it'll come to me, it'll get to me. You could even get to me through Helen. Helen, if you've got all of that, just say, care of Helen, she would find me. Yeah.
Perfect. And same for you, Helen, if anyone's got any questions or anything, are you happy for them to reach out on LinkedIn and just drop your note?
Best way, I think so.
Perfect.
I think what I would say, LinkedIn at the moment, I'm really enjoying the debate, particularly around D&I. I think there's some really good, bold, courageous truths being spoken, and I think be part of the debate on there, I would say, and I'm happy to see you there.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much. It's been a good one, that, and I'm sure we're going to do something else in the future because there feels like there's a lot been unsaid. But I really appreciate your time and thank you for coming on the HIT podcast.
Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you for the opportunity, both Helen and James. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Nice to
Cheers,
see you.
Moreen.
Bye.
Cheers.